smaller hands and more of a fake suntan than he first surmised. Comey charges the president as unethical and untethered to the truth and institutional values, all of which led the president to unload on the man he fired today on Twitter, calling him an untruthful slimeball, and added it was his, quote, great honor to fire James Comey. While Press Secretary Sarah Sanders called Comey a disgraced partisan hack who is a self-admitted leaker on a PR tour to, as you suggested, pad his bank account. The book could also be trouble for former Obama Attorney General Loretta Lynch, who felt the need earlier this week to do an interview trying to explain her tarmac meeting with former President Bill Clinton in the middle of the Hillary Clinton email probe. Comey had to take more of a personal role in the server investigation, he says, because of something involving Lynch that he writes in the book is a development still unknown to the American people. Meanwhile, more problems for Comey's former number two at the FBI, Andrew McCabe. A scathing report came out today from the Justice Department Inspector General, which found McCabe lied 4 different times about his role confirming the existence of the FBI's separate probe of the Clinton Foundation. The president tweeted about that. DOJ just issued the McCabe report, which is a total disaster. He lied. McCabe was totally controlled by Comey. McCabe is Comey. No collusion, all made up by this den of thieves and lowlifes, the president says. Meanwhile, Fox News has confirmed the president today telephoned his longtime personal attorney, Michael Cohen, to, they say, check in. The New York Times, though, notes this could cause new problems for the president, since defense attorneys usually tell their clients, don't talk to one another during a criminal probe. Lawyers representing Cohen and the president were in a Manhattan courtroom today, trying to stop the Justice Department from going through documents seized during a series of FBI raids. Prosecutors also revealed they had already gotten secret search warrants before the raids to go through several of Cohen's email accounts. The president has called this a witch hunt, and the man in the crosshairs for approving the raids of Cohen's materials is Rod Rosenstein, the deputy attorney general. A source close to him tells Fox tonight he does not believe he'll be fired tonight, though he's told confidants in recent days he's ready to accept any outcome from the president. Tucker?
Oh, the drama. Thank you, Ed.
Who goes on?
There's a lot going on, but what have we learned about Jim Comey from his book and the interviews he's done about the book? Well, maybe the most shocking fact of all is how banal he is. Comey ran the most powerful law enforcement agency in America. He was a central player in the last presidential election and in its aftermath ever since. You'd think you'd be impressed when he speaks, even if you don't agree with him. But no. Jim Comey is as conventional as they come. We know that now. His interviews sound like Chelsea Clinton doing a Q&A with Us Weekly. Comey says his literary hero is, brace yourself, Atticus Finch, because apparently he couldn't think of anything more cliched than that. You couldn't either. He says he wishes Trump would read the New York Times op-ed page. He recommended Sheryl Sandberg's lean in to his staff at the FBI, seriously, and he says he'd like to have Sandberg to a dinner party, and so on and on. This is America's top G-man, or was? He sounds like every other sensitive, guilt-ridden, middle-aged suburban liberal. Not impressive at all. Maybe that's why Comey did not hesitate before destroying any remaining public trust in the FBI in order to sell this book. FBI directors are not supposed to let emotion and political considerations influence government investigations, but Comey doesn't even hide it. He admits his behavior in the fall of 2016 may have been colored by his desire to make Hillary Clinton, quote, a legitimate president. So that settles that. There's now nobody in either party, Republican or Democrat, who will ever again think the Clinton investigation was conducted fairly. Thanks, Jim Comey. Or the Russia investigation, for that matter. Here's what Comey told ABC about that. Watch.
Did you tell him that the Steele dossier had been financed by his political opponents?
No. I didn't even think I used the term Steele dossier. I just talked about additional material.
But did he have a right to know that?
That had been financed by his political opponents? I don't know the answer to that. It wasn't necessary for my goal, which was to alert him that we had this information.
Telling the truth, says Jim Comey, quote, wasn't necessary for my goal. Apparently it wasn't. Whatever else you think about Donald Trump or his administration or whatever, you ought to be happy that that guy, Jim Comey, is no longer running the FBI. Alan Dershowitz is a lawyer and professor emeritus at Harvard Law School, as well as author of Trumped Up, How Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy. We spoke to him just a minute ago. Professor, do the things that Comey has said and written since he left the FBI confirm the decision to fire him from the FBI?
No, it should have been done much, much earlier. It should have been done on the day of the inauguration, and it should have reflected itself in the fact that nobody should ever have appointed him to be head of the FBI. This is a man who is revenge-driven, who is prepared to leak through a law professor at Columbia, who is prepared to disclose confidential conversations he had with the president-elect and the president of the United States. He's exactly the wrong person to have headed the most important important law enforcement agency in the United States. This sends a horrible message to FBI agents and law enforcement people about leaking and about confidences and about trying to keep emotion out of law enforcement and politics out of law enforcement. To me, the worst part of it is when he both compares the president to a mob boss, which proves my point of trumped up, that you can create crimes out of almost anything and call a mob boss somebody who's running the presidency of the United States. And the fact that he is willing to say on television that it's possible that the president was with prostitutes in a hotel room with, urination and all that. He's the head of the FBI. He knows the truth. He has seen all the secrets. And for him to start speculating on that kind of nonsense and rubbish, and not to disclose when he spoke to the president, as you said, that this information was paid for by a political opponent. I used to have a good feeling about Comey. I met him a few times when he was in Boston. I now have only very strong negative feelings about him, and he just enhances the suspicion that I think so many Americans now have of law enforcement. And we ought to be trusting law enforcement, and nobody today would trust Comey with secrets or confidences.
So if he were alleging that the president were acting like a mob boss, calling hits out on people committing crimes, that'd be one thing. But he's in effect criticizing the way the president talks. He's from Queens. He does actually sound like a mob boss sometimes because he's from that part of the country.
Hey, I'm
that's
from
not
Brooklyn. Hey,
exactly.
Come on, right.
There you go. No, but that's the point, kind of. Should law enforcement officials be making comments like this at all? I mean, doesn't it detracts from the entire organization that they purportedly represent?
And, the idea of revealing these secrets, it's not 30 years later when he's writing for history the way Henry Kissinger has done and others have done. This is a gossipy, revenge, make money quick, get even, hurt your political opponents, raise questions about the politicization of the Justice Department and the FBI. It's the worst possible book at the worst possible time for the worst possible reasons. We hear a lot about corrupt motives that can't make a presidential act into a crime. But talk about Comey's motives. Have anybody asked him about his motives, why he wrote this book? Why does he feel it's important for the American public to hear about information that he has no idea whether it's truthful or not? It's really scandalous and shameful, and I'm so disappointed with him.
So he has a lot of friends in the FBI, and we know that because the emails between them were FOIA'd, and now we have access to them. Shouldn't it make us nervous because he is now a political figure? He's chosen to become one. What about, Americans who like Trump? Should they be worried about getting equal treatment from FBI officials who are sympathetic to Jim Comey?
Well, the problem is, of course, it's not a problem. FBI agents are human. Law enforcement people are human. There are pro-Trump people in the FBI. There are anti-Trump people. They all take an oath not to allow politics or personal views to get in the way of their job. And here we see the former director letting his political and personal, I don't think they're partisan views, they're get-even views, get in the way of their job. And when you combine that with the Strzok disclosures, when you combine that with some of the other disclosures, it may serve a good purpose because it tells us the FBI agents are not what we see in stereotypes in the movies. They're real human beings with passions, but we have to figure out a way of making it so clear that these civil servants who sacrifice their lives have to keep their politics at home and their passions at home and their personal views at home. And this just moves the conversation in the wrong direction.
I agree. And it makes a lot of people paranoid for good reason. Professor, thank you for coming on. Great to see you. The Comey book adds to a long list of reasons to question the integrity of the former FBI director, but according to Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, how dare you question people in authority? In fact, says Congressman Himes, you will burn in hell for doing that. Watch.
The idea that this man is dishonest, and remember, this is all part and parcel of the attempt that the White House is making to besmirch Robert Mueller, a decorated war hero. That's what is happening here. So yes, let's have that conversation about whether Jim Comey made the right move in talking about the Hillary Clinton thing, but people will rot in hell for besmirching the reputation, the integrity, and the professional history of these two men.
So if you're a war hero, nobody can criticize you. Better tell Ollie North that. I don't think he benefited from that standard. Joel Payne worked as an advertising director at Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and joins us tonight. So, Joel, just as a general matter, do you think you burn in hell if you criticize people in authority?
Oh, no, I don't think so. And listen, I think the big issue here is whether the president has the moral authority to call Jim Comey a liar. I mean, let's be honest. The president has a pretty checkered history when it comes to being honest and telling the truth.
Well, but luckily we don't have to rely on the president for that, and the president's views are immaterial. From my perspective, as an American citizen, I'm really concerned that someone who ran the most powerful law enforcement agency probably in the world, outside of China anyway, with the power to kill people, is so transparently partisan and political. Even if he were on my side, I would be troubled by that. You're not?
Listen, he took some shots at the president, but, I mean, let's be honest, the president's been taking shots at him for the last 6 months.
That's true.
He's been taking very personal, direct shots. He's been running an opposition campaign out of the West Wing. So
yes.
I think you have to give Jim Comey a little bit of a pass on
well, look, I understand. I mean, I'm just being as honest as I can be. I understand why Comey's annoyed. He got fired. He's been attacked. I get it. But the difference is that Trump is an elected official. He's a politician. We put him there by voting for him, whether you like it or not. It was part of our democratic process. Comey's a bureaucrat. He was appointed. We don't really have any control over what he does or how long he stays. He's not supposed to be political. In fact, when Comey was canned, a bunch of FBI officials texted and emailed one another about that, expressing concern about it, but also solidarity with Jim Comey. Those emails were FOIA'd. We now have them. I'm going to put some on the screen here and read them to you. The first is from Renee McDermott, who wrote this. Unexpected news such as this is hard to understand, but I know you all know our director stood for what is right and what is true. Triple exclamation point. He truly made us better than when we needed it most. The next is from David Gelios and says, I hope this is an instance of fake news. The third from Michael DeLeon, who says, and I'm quoting, everyone is surprised and we're certainly disappointed with the events. In an earlier email he wrote, we all feel the pain associated with the loss of a leader who is fully engaged. These are people who are on Comey's side. Comey is now a political figure. If I'm investigated as a U.S. citizen by Renee McDermott and I don't like Comey or I like Trump or I don't like Hillary, why wouldn't I be nervous about that investigation?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, Tucker, these are people who are expressing personal feelings for someone they work very closely with. By the way, let's go back to the Watergate investigation, not Watergate, the Bill Clinton investigation, Ken Starr. Look at the people who were running Ken Starr's investigation. All Republicans, all people who didn't like Bill Clinton. But did that invalidate
I thought
what
we
they
weren't
found?
supposed to be happy with that. Look, these are not politicians.
Sure.
These are FBI agents who run. No, but Comey has put them in an impossible situation. They are now tied to Comey. They are Comey partisans. It's okay to think your boss is great, he got fired, it's sad. I get that.
Sure.
But now that Comey has made himself into a political figure, it besmirches their reputations and it calls into question the independence of the FBI. That's the point I'm making.
Tucker, what has made Jim Comey into a political figure is the president using him as a whipping boy publicly. That's what's made him into a political figure.
Comey just wrote a book attacking him. Look,
yes, he wrote a book attacking him because the president spent the last 6 months attacking him. Isn't this the president that says I'm going to punch back? I'm not going to let people take shots at me?
You're absolutely right.
So what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
What I care about is not defending Trump. What I care about is the integrity of our institutions whose employees carry guns and have the right to break my front door down. And the FBI is number one in line on that list.
I understand.
And I am very worried that this is politicizing and in the eyes of the public discrediting our main law enforcement operation. And Jim Comey didn't need to write this book. He did it for the money. And he shouldn't. He should be one of the 8 guys in America who takes a pass on the book and takes a pass on the money because the effect is too damaging.
Tucker, here's what's interesting, though. We've talked here, about 5 minutes? We haven't talked once about the Mueller investigation, which is very legitimate, which is not a witch hunt, which has already had 3 people plead guilty to wrongdoings on the president's campaign. Papadopoulos, Manafort, and Gates. More are coming. Michael Cohen's in a lot of problems.
First of all, how do you know more are coming? If it's entirely legitimate, do you have some inside source there? I mean, what do you know that we don't know of this, quote, legitimate investigation?
Well, I'm doing what everybody else is doing.
So
I'm following the trail.
Because they're leaking details from the investigation to the press. Would a legitimate investigation do that?
So I guess if you don't like leaking, then you don't like Scooter Libby being.
I'll tell you what I don't like. What I don't like is in a criminal investigation leaking against the subjects of the investigation. That discredits it. It happens all the time, not just in this one. It's always wrong. And yet the left is enjoying it because it's goring the ox of Trump.
I'm personally not enjoying anything. I don't like the fact that we don't trust our president.
What did you think about his lawyer's office? Talk to 5 lawyers, 3 of whom may hate Trump, and ask them, what do you think of breaking into Michael Cohen's office? I bet all 5, if they're honest, would say, whoa, I hate Trump, but that's too much. That's
I think there's a very high bar to have to do what those agents did, which suggests to me that there's some real stuff that Michael Cohen's out.
Oh, so you're taking that on faith. Should the rest of us take it on faith that the Stormy Daniels affair merits breaking into his personal lawyer's office?
Because the president has been running an opposition campaign against the FBI, now everybody can doubt what the FBI, what happens when they're going out and they're trying to fight terror or they're trying to prevent people from shooting up our streets?
Now we're back to the Jim Himes category. Don't ever question those in authority.
No.
Or else it's your fault.
You're the law and order party. Republicans, conservatives are the law and order people.
Yeah, that's why I don't want to see the former head of the FBI become a political figure and make fun of the president's hands. Like, what does that have to do with anything?
And that's why I don't want the president to use the FBI as a whipping boy so he can distract attention from his own wrongdoing.
But the president's a politician. That's what they do. The head of the FBI shouldn't do that. Are you happy with him mocking Trump's marriage or his hands? What is that?
No, look, that's not what I'm focused on. I'm not focused on what Jim Comey said.
You don't think that discredits the FBI?
I think those are personal observations that he made. I'm more interested in what he talked about in terms of the president being mistruthful and dishonest in some of his conversations with him.
Okay. Well, thank you, Joel, for joining us. I appreciate it. We don't yet agree, but keep coming back. Man of principle, Jim Comey took a shot at the president's marriage during a recent interview because that's, of course, central to the Mueller investigation in Russia. Pardon me. Dan Bongino joins us to discuss that next. Plus, there have been meetings at the White House late into the evening. They're about Syria, and obviously we are ready to bring you any news on that subject as we get it. So keep it right here on Fox.
Something that distracted me because he said, if there's even a 1% chance my wife thinks that's true, that's terrible. I'm a flawed human being, but there's literally 0 chance that my wife would think that was true. So what kind of marriage to what kind of man does your wife think there's only a 99% chance you didn't do that?
Jim Comey is a very good man. He's a very good marriage. He used his interview with George Stephanopoulos to remind the rest of us of that and to weigh in on the health of the president's marriage, because, of course, that's what principled, neutral law enforcement officers are sworn to do. Dan Bongino is an NRA TV contributor, a former Secret Service agent, and he joins us tonight. Dan, the former FBI director, went on to comment on the size of the president's hands, which he checked when he worked for him. You've been in law enforcement a long time. Are these kind of categories that you'd say most FBI agents assess before beginning a job? The health of the boss's marriage, the size of his hands, things like that?
Yeah. Yes, tan lines. Tucker commented on the tan lines around his eyes. That's fascinating. Donald Trump's Tucker, we're talking about the director of the most powerful law enforcement agency possibly in the history of the planet that has the power to take your freedom and take your life. Decisions that can change the world are made every day. And he's commenting on President Trump's tan lines, the size of his hands, and the quality of a marriage he knows nothing about. This guy has entirely beclowned himself, and he is the Kaiser Sose of this movie right now. He plays off as this big innocent white knight. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, he was the guy single-handedly responsible for some of the worst debacles in FBI history in regards to this Obamagate fiasco.
Well, that's I guess the other thing. I mean, I try to be honest. There are a lot of, it's hard because it's such a partisan moment, but you want to be as honest as you can. And I've said a bunch of times on the show, I think you agree. I think this guy really hurt Hillary Clinton's campaign. I'm happy with the outcome, but I think that he behaved in a flaky, bizarre, irresponsible way with Hillary. Where are all the Hillary people, the honest Democrats, to point that out in this moment?
Tucker, politics has clouded this entire conversation. I think that's crystal clear. The case against Jim Comey is a clear one. What you said is entirely accurate. Let me just remind people what happened with Jim Comey. These are his own words. They're still on YouTube for you all to see. When Jim Comey was brought up to the Hill and was questioned about the quarterly briefings he was supposed to give Congress as per practice and protocol about sensitive CI investigations. Gee, you think maybe spying on Trump was sensitive? And when he was asked why he didn't notify Congress almost a year, these were quarterly briefings, meaning for the liberals every 3 months, he said, well, we didn't notify you because of the sensitivity of the matter. Tucker, that's the whole point of congressional oversight and a system of checks and balances. That he thought he was running a rogue agency, Jim Comey. The case against him is crystal clear.
I know. I know. And it's what a shame to see it reduced to Trump attacks Comey, Comey attacks Trump. I mean, there are irreplaceable principles at stake here, not having nothing to do with Comey or Trump, but having to do with the ability of citizens to trust law enforcement.
Tucker, the President of the United States, at the time President-elect and a candidate, was spied on by his opposition political. That's not in question. The mechanics of how it happened, we can argue. Jim Comey was the FBI director when that happened, and the information they used to do it has been debunked by every single credible person that looked at it. Is that being lost in this whole story? I mean, it's embarrassing, isn't it?
Well, it's terrifying, and if you told me this 30 years ago, I'd say that that can't happen. It wouldn't happen here, but it is happening. Dan, thank you for that, and thanks for reminding us of what's at stake.
Yes,
well, the left is obsessed with something new, and it's not unproven Russian collusion. Instead, it's unproved sex scandals. Sex scandals. It's 1998 again. Stay tuned. Where a decision is apparently being made on the next move in Syria. We're hearing conflicting things, but we think that there could be a decision of some kind in either direction before too long, and of course we are on it. We have journalists on the scene, and we're going to bring you whatever we learn as soon as we learn it. So stay right here at Fox. Meanwhile, today was a day of bad news for the resistance. Jim Comey's tell-all book, hyped for more than a year, ended up revealing not very much except about Jim Comey. It revealed that he hid dossier information from the president, including the origins of the dossier. Meanwhile, the DOJ Investigator General's report on Andrew McCabe described how he misled investigators, and that's why he got canned. Well, The View is obsessed, by the way, with Trump's sex life. They did not talk about any of this. Instead, they talked about what Trump was doing, apparently, in his private time. Watch this conversation.
So if someone told you that your husband watched hookers pee on each other,
oh, God,
would you think even for a minute that there was a possibility, like even a 1% chance? I can't even imagine my husband doing such a thing. And I would say, what are you, nuts?
Yep. Joy Behar's got a much more normal personal life than you do. Chris Hahn is a Long Island radio show host, and he joins us tonight. So, Chris, that's the resistance right there.
I know Joy. She's got a very nice life. Trust me.
Yeah. I know her, too. But I would say this. That's kind of the face of the resistance. Now, for the last year, we've been hearing Trump is degrading the country, and I kind of get what you're saying. But at the same time, the left has degraded itself to the point that Russian collusion has somehow morphed into a conversation about hookers and sex lives and all this stuff that I can't describe on TV, but Joy Behar's happy to. I mean, are you proud of that? Is that kind of where you want the conversation to be? Do you think it's a valid focus of an investigation?
Tucker, look, this is fun to talk about, but it's going to have no impact on the 2018.
Then what's the point of talking about it?
No. I don't know. I think people love the salacious details, right? But I don't care what the president does in his personal life, even if any of that stuff is true. I care that the Russians may have compromised on him. That's a problem for the American people. I care about how he paid for it, just like we cared about how Elliot Spitzer paid for it. I think that's what's going on with the Michael Cohen situation.
I did not care how Elliot Spitzer paid for it, and the U.S. government shafted Elliot Spitzer using laws from the War on Terror and the Patriot Act. I despise Elliot Spitzer, but what they did to him was horrible. I said it at the time, and I'll say it again. It was a total abuse of power, just like this. Right. So you may not care about the details of Trump's personal life, but how do you feel about Robert Mueller dispatching FBI agents to break into his lawyer's office to take materials on Stormy Daniels and the Access Hollywood tape? I mean, how can you defend that?
I do not think it was just about that. I think it might have had something to do with Michael Cohen's trip to Prague, which he denied vehemently, which was also part of the dossier, which we are now hearing is something that actually happened in 2016. So I think the special counsel is investigating and following the evidence where it goes. And remember, it was a Republican United States attorney who was appointed by Donald Trump who signed that warrant.
The last thing I care about is the party identification of anybody, because the categories have gotten so scrambled. What I care about is whether you believe in democracy, due process, the rights of the individual against the group, or whether you support the kind of fascism that we're watching right now, which is people breaking in other people's lawyers' offices to gather information on the Access Hollywood tape and Stormy Daniels. Look, I think it's fair. If there was collusion with Russia, find it.
you are simplifying why they broke in there. I do not believe that that was the only reason why they did it. I don't think that they would have broken into his office for that. I think there were other criminal enterprises going on with Michael Cohen that not just the special counsel, but
what are you talking about? How do you know this? Hold on, how do you know this? Do you have some source in the investigation?
I'm a lawyer, and I understand attorney-client privilege, and I understand what it would take for a prosecutor to get a warrant like that. It is not something that they would have taken lightly, especially if it's the President of the United States.
So you have total faith, like all liberals right now, you have total faith in the authorities. And if they say something, it must be true. And how dare you, as Congressman Himes said earlier today, how dare you question them? You're going to go to hell. When did liberals get so slavishly loyal to authority?
I am not loyal to authority.
Oh, really? Because you're doing a pretty good imitation of it.
But Tucker, how can we assume that it's nefarious and political? I mean, I think that the president is protesting too much. If the president
it's not the president.
He should start acting like an innocent person.
Okay. I love that. You sound like the New York Times. If you're innocent, why do you need attorney-client privilege in the first place? Why do you need a lawyer? Why do you need a trial?
I sound like every conservative, including you, who I've ever debated over the last 8 years about other things where law enforcement goes into.
As someone who's been falsely accused of a crime, I have not one time in my life said, if you're innocent, why do you need the rights afforded you by the Bill of Rights? I don't think that. I am a civil libertarian. I always have been one. You need them because they're guaranteed
I've debated
by
so
the
many
Constitution.
Conservatives, I confuse you all.
Yeah, well.
I confuse so many conservatives I've debated over the years. But look, that's the way I've heard it for the last 8 years. I've heard conservative after conservative say to me, if you're innocent, what are you worried about? So the president should take that advice.
That's an entirely mindless thing to say, and if I've ever said that, I profusely apologize to my family and America. Chris, thank you. It's nice to see you. Everybody assumes an attack on Syria would be a simple thing. Is that true? What are the risks of attacking the Assad regime? We'll speak to retired Army Colonel McGregor in just a minute as we await a decision about what's going to happen next in Syria. You're looking at live pictures of the White House where that decision is being made. When we hear it, of course, we'll bring it to you immediately live on Fox. Conversations taking place right now at the White House about a response to Syria. We're going to learn very soon whether the United States military will be conducting some sort of strike on that country. And, of course, we'll bring it to you the second we hear. Many people believe that is likely to happen. It is also almost universally assumed in the United States that that attack can take place with minimal risk. But is that true? Are there possible hazards to a Syria strike? Douglas McGregor is a retired Army colonel. He's author of the book Margin of Victory, and he joins us tonight. Colonel, thanks very much for coming on. So assuming this does happen,
right,
and again, many people believe it will, what are the risks?
Well, it depends on the option that he selects. I mean, obviously, I'm one of those people that voted for Trump, the nationalist,
yes,
who believed that America first meant avoiding conflict and building prosperity at home. The best option is nothing at all. He seems to be in the grip of the globalists, the global nannies that want to run around in Madeleine Albright's world and punish evildoers for reasons that don't make any sense to me, since we have no real interest in Syria, and the war there is effectively over. But I think he's looking at three possibilities right now. One is nothing, which is probably not going to happen. Two is another cosmetic strike, like the one last year.
Yes.
You'll recall that last year we fired 60-some cruise missiles. They landed in the dirt, exploded nicely. Everyone congratulated themselves, and we walked away, and nothing happened. The third option is a serious air and sea-based assault with missiles, aircraft, against a number of very sensitive targets where potentially we could end up killing Russians, Iranians, as well as Syrian government forces and potentially civilians.
It sounds like, from facts that have been reported, the likelihood of killing foreign nationals, Russians specifically, in Syria in a widespread strike is very high. So what would be the consequences if that were to happen?
Well, assuming he doesn't call the Russians and tell them what he's going to hit, which is what he did the last time.
Right.
I think that we'll probably lose potentially some aircraft. We could lose some ships at sea, because the Russians have made it very clear that if they are attacked, they will respond. And they have the capability to do that. And they can respond from Russia. Russia is less than 500 miles away from Syria. We forget that sort of thing. So they have missiles and capabilities, precision-guided strike weapons that can reach our ships at sea. They also have submarines operating in the area, as we do. So the potential for a real collision on the conventional level is very high.
So I think most Americans watching this, whether they supported the idea of the strike, if indeed it happens, want there to be an upside for the United States.
The only upside that I can see is non-intervention, because we don't have anything at stake. If we get involved and we do something along the lines of the third option that I described, and we lose people, Americans are going to say, what? What happened? Why? What's the rationale for this? Remember, Trump used to say over and over and over again, what's in it for us? And he pointed to the last 15 years and said trillions and trillions of dollars lost, nothing achieved. What are we trying to achieve? What's the end state that we're looking for? If all we're doing is expressing our righteous indignation at the alleged use of a chemical weapon, we're kidding ourselves. There are no good guys on the ground in Syria. Any number of people could have done this.
So who are the figures in the president's orbit encouraging this?
Who isn't? I mean, this is the question that, we raise routinely. Again, it's back to the globalist versus the nationalist. He seems to have lots of globalists around him. I'm sure John Bolton is excited at the prospect of bombing somebody somewhere. I suspect that he's being supported in the Pentagon as well. Who's going to push back against this? I don't know. I've never seen any evidence for serious pushback. Someone who says absolutely not. So the president seems to be on his own, if he's still the nationalist that he said he was.
Clarify, if you would. You make, I think, a pretty strong case for not doing this. What would be the case? What is the case being made to the president for doing this?
Well, I think he's being told that he has no choice, which is absolutely wrong. He's the president of the United States. He does not have to intervene under any circumstances. But the globalists are saying, well, it's a matter of global leadership. You have to be seen as being on the moral high ground. Remember, hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. We have a lot of hypocrisy in this town about what is right and what is wrong and what is moral and what is not. And I think he's going to be presented with this specious moral argument. There's nothing moral about coming into a war where 250,000 people have already been killed.
You've been around this sort of thing your whole life, yes. Many decades. Are you surprised by the support that this decision is getting from the left, from liberals on other channels?
No, not at all, because I think the left-right dichotomy
Hillary Clinton, meanwhile, says America is racist, and the solution is to follow Maxine Waters. That story next.
Racist and white supremacist views are lifted up in the media and in the White House.
We've been waiting for news on Syria and the American response, and apparently we have some. We want to go to Brett Baer, who has that information, who's standing by.
Hey, Tucker, just seconds ago, we have word that the President of the United States will address the nation tonight, sometime this evening. This, obviously, the decision about possible U.S. military retaliation for that chemical weapons attack in Syria on April 4th. We do know that the Vice President, who's in Lima, Peru, was hurried out of a dinner, a banquet there, and has returned to his hotel in Peru. And we have breaking news out of the Pentagon. Jennifer Griffin is standing by there with what she's hearing from officials. Jen.
Tucker, I am hearing from a senior administration official that the U.S. has taken the decision to strike Syria in response to its use of chemical weapons. That is from two administration sources. We spoke to them tonight. We do expect, as Brett mentioned, that the president will address the nation this evening. We have been on standby here at the Pentagon. We have been reporting all evening that U.S. military assets have been in position now for several days. We expect certain naval assets that we have mentioned to be involved in that strike, including the USS Donald Cook. We have been reporting that there is a French frigate in the eastern Mediterranean. We have also reported that the British Prime Minister has authorized the use of submarines in the strike. We know that the President spoke again to Emmanuel Macron, the French Prime Minister, today, and that Macron himself called the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, earlier today to offer an opportunity to return to some sort of peace negotiations in Syria to end the 7-year civil war. But tonight we can report from administration officials that the U.S. has taken the decision to strike Syria in response for its use of chemical weapons. Tucker?
Thanks, Jen.
Okay, Tucker, just to follow up, this, remember, is just 1 year after the U.S. struck in Syria, April 7th, 2017, 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles from 2 Navy destroyers in retaliation for the sarin nerve gas attacks then. So we are now 1 year later, and it appears, as Jen is reporting from 2 different officials, that the decision has been made to move forward with this strike. What exactly that looks like and how different it may be from the 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles a year ago, we don't know. John Roberts is on the north lawn of the White House with what he's hearing there. John?
We're just a little less than 10 minutes away now from what we're expecting to be a presidential statement out of the diplomatic reception room, which is an area here at the White House that the president has been favoring lately in terms of making official statements. That's where he was when he held his nose and signed the omnibus spending bill. And now it looks like we're going back into the diplomatic reception room again tonight. I can tell you that over the last 3-4 days, the White House has been a hive of activity as the president's national security team has met repeatedly here. Most recently, a deputies meeting at about 5 o'clock this afternoon. Looks like they were just putting dotting the final I's and crossing the final T's in preparation for whatever the president is going to announce tonight. Brett?
John, we want to bring Tucker back in here. You know, it's been interesting to watch this decision-making process. You just had a guest on, Tucker, talking about that and how the president is getting to this point. But obviously, he was out on a limb with what he tweeted directly earlier in the week. And it seemed like as the week went on, we were getting closer and closer to this very decision that's been made tonight.
Right. So tell us how, since you cover this closely and you know everyone involved, tell us how you think we got to this point. This is clearly not something that he ran on, and it's inconsistent with a lot of the things that he said over the years, barring the existence of information that's very different from what we know publicly. Who in his orbit do you think was encouraging this decision?
Well, clearly, his new national security advisor is in the position, at least previously, has said. John Bolton has criticized President Obama for his lack of following up on the red line, as has President Trump, and was largely seen as a successful deployment of those Tomahawk cruise missiles a year ago, felt good about it and talked about it. I think Bolton was probably actively involved here. The inside skinny that we get from officials around town is that there was a battle back and forth about the level of response. Not that there was going to be no response, but what it would look like and whether it would include aircraft and what it looks like. And we're still trying to get tonight what that might be, Tucker.
Yeah, we certainly are. Interesting. So your sources suggest that John Bolton was, and it would make sense, but would be an advocate for this.
Yes, 100%. And, you know, once the president said what he said on Twitter, and obviously he walked it back a bit, saying it could happen at any time, it is in the same position as the president of the United States laying down a marker and saying something, and if it had not been followed through, based on the intelligence they had, they say that the Syrian military is 100% behind this. Now, I know what you've been talking about and talking through, but the officials we're talking to say they're confident in the intelligence.
Yeah, they've said that to me too. Thank you, Brett. We're going to be checking, of course, in with Brett Baer for the rest of the night as we follow this unfolding story. The president is set to speak in about 4 minutes from now. I want to go back to Colonel McGregor, who's still here in the studio with us. So the idea that the United States could know for certain that the chemical attack came from the Syrian government in less than a week after the attack seems implausible. That's what they're saying. What's your take on that?
Well, I know that the Swedish government offered to conduct a thorough investigation, and that was rejected in the UN by us and our allies. So it would seem that we've decided to strike on the basis of what we say we know. And let's be frank, again, 250,000 people have been killed in this war. This war is about over. The Turks, the Iranians, and the Russians are going to divide up Syria. That's inevitable. They hopefully will be able to establish peace, but that presupposes that they can all reach an amicable solution. The question is, why are we doing this?
Well, we're obviously being pushed by other countries to do this, and is it possible, since we are doing it, and we're going to hear the details in about 3 minutes, is it possible to act in a way that helps us, that benefits the United States?
Well, frankly, no, because, again, this is over. The decision has been made. We have no role in Syria for all intents and purposes. Secondly, the targets, if they are only Syrian targets and we are informing the Russians ahead of time, are irrelevant. The Syrians don't have enough.
May I stop you there and ask, do you think it's likely that, as in the case last year, that we've alerted the Russians where we're striking so they can move their troops out of the way?
I suspect so. I think so. I'd be surprised if we did not. Because, again, do we want to risk a serious confrontation with the Russians? I hope the president will tell us when he speaks. But I suspect he will say, yes, we have informed the Russians because we're pinning this exclusively on the Syrian government. But hitting the Syrian government installations is irrelevant.
So the attack, the missile strike almost exactly a year ago, took place less than a week after the United States announced a change in its policy towards Syria, that we're no longer going to try and take out the Assad government.
Right.
Less than a week later, there was this chemical attack that we said the Assad government committed. This attack comes about a little over a week after we announced another policy change, which would be pulling our 2,000 troops out of Syria. Do you have to be a conspiracy nut to see that maybe there's a connection between the changes in policy and these chemical attacks?
No, I don't think you do. And that's why I think Americans should be skeptical of what they're hearing. It would have been better to have had a thorough investigation by a third party. We went through this in the past in Europe. We had the Finns come in who were considered to be reliable, uninvolved partners that settled these kinds of issues. I don't think we want to settle the issue. I think we want to strike. I think there is an enormous amount of support and interest inside the United States, in Washington, in the Department of Defense, in the State Department, to keep us in Syria, to keep that little 2,000-man force up in the northeastern corner of that